Marcus Chen had always believed his job was the most boring position at Area 51. While others worked on classified aircraft or analyzed mysterious materials, he spent his days maintaining the facility's computer networks. He fixed servers, updated software, and made sure the internet connection stayed stable for the scientists who did the real work. For 3 years, Marcus walked the same hallways, entered the same access codes, and sat at the same desk in the underground IT department. The most exciting thing that happened was when the coffee machine broke and he had to call for repairs. He often joked with his wife that he was probably the only person at Area 51 who knew exactly what he did for work and could talk about it at dinner parties. The facility buzzed with activity around him, but Marcus remained invisible. Scientists rushed past carrying strange devices. Military personnel moved through corridors with serious expressions. Researchers whispered about projects with code names he wasn't cleared to know. Meanwhile, Marcus just made sure their computers worked. Everything changed on a Tuesday morning in October. Marcus arrived at his usual time, 7:30 a.m., carrying his lunch and a large coffee. He badged into the facility and took the elevator down to sub-level 3, where the IT department occupied a small corner next to the janitorial supplies. His supervisor, Janet, was already at her desk, typing furiously. "Marcus, thank God you're here," Janet said without looking up. "We've got a massive network failure in Section 12. Half the servers are down, and Dr. Reeves is having a complete meltdown. She says they're in the middle of some critical test and can't afford any delays." Section 12 was deep underground, on sub-level 7. Marcus had been there a few times before to replace equipment, but it was always empty when he visited. The scientists who worked there kept strange hours and seemed to avoid contact with support staff. Marcus grabbed his toolkit and headed for the elevator. The elevator descended slowly, passing sublevels he'd never visited. When the doors opened at sublevel 7, Marcus stepped into a corridor that looked different from the rest of the facility. The walls were covered in some kind of metallic paneling that seemed to shift color slightly as he walked past. The lighting was dimmer, casting strange shadows that made him feel uneasy. Section 12 was at the end of the hallway, behind 2 sets of security doors. Marcus used his maintenance access card and passed through both checkpoints. The inner chamber was enormous, much larger than he'd expected. The ceiling stretched up 3 stories, and the room was filled with equipment he'd never seen before. In the center of the chamber stood a massive ring-shaped structure, about 30 feet in diameter. It was made of the same shifting metallic material as the walls, but it pulsed with a soft blue light that seemed to come from within the metal itself. Thick cables ran from the ring to banks of computers and control panels arranged in a semicircle around it. Dr. Sarah Reeves stood at one of the control panels, frantically pressing buttons and talking rapidly into a headset. She was a tall woman in her 50s, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Marcus had seen her around the facility but had never spoken to her directly. She had a reputation for being brilliant and demanding. "The network servers are right over there, Doctor." Reeves pointed to a bank of equipment along the wall without looking at Marcus. 3 of them went offline at exactly 6:42 a.m. "We need them back up immediately." A.m. Marcus walked over to examine the servers. They looked normal enough. Standard rack-mounted units like those used throughout the facility. But as he got closer, he noticed something odd. The cables connecting them to the main network weren't standard Ethernet cables. They were made of the same metallic material as the ring, and they pulsed with faint light. "Dr. Reeves," Marcus called out, "these cables aren't in our inventory system. What kind of equipment are you running here?" "That's classified," she snapped. "Just fix the servers." Marcus began his diagnostic routine. The servers themselves were functioning normally, but they couldn't communicate with the network. The problem seemed to be with the strange cables. As he traced one of them back toward the ring, he heard a low humming sound that made his teeth ache. "Dr. Reeves, is that ring supposed to be making that noise?" Marcus asked. For the first time since he'd arrived, Dr. Reeves looked up from her control panel. Her face had gone pale. "What noise?" "That humming sound. It's getting louder." Dr. Reeves ran to another control panel and started reading displays. "Oh no. Oh no, no, no. The containment field is destabilizing. How long have you been in here? About 10 minutes. What's a containment field? You need to leave. Now, Dr. Reeves was practically shouting. Everyone needs to evacuate. Section 12 immediately. But even as she spoke, the humming grew louder. The blue light from the ring began to pulse faster and brighter. The air in the chamber started to shimmer like heat waves rising from hot pavement. Marcus felt a strange pulling sensation, as if something was trying to draw him toward the ring. I can't move, Marcus said, his voice strangely calm despite the terror he felt. Something's holding me. Dr. Reeves was now speaking rapidly into her headset, calling for emergency protocols, but Marcus could barely hear her over the humming, which had become a deep, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate through his bones. The ring was now glowing so brightly that he had to squint to look at it. The gateway is opening, Dr. Reeves shouted. This isn't supposed to happen. The test isn't until next week. Gateway. The word echoed in Marcus's mind as he realized what he was looking at. This wasn't just some experimental aircraft or advanced computer system. This was something far more extraordinary and dangerous. The ring was some kind of portal, and it was activating. The pulling sensation grew stronger. Marcus's feet began sliding across the floor toward the ring. Despite his efforts to resist, tools from his kit started flying through the air, drawn by the same invisible force. Papers and equipment throughout the chamber lifted off tables and desks, swirling in a growing vortex centered on the glowing ring. Shut it down, Marcus yelled. I'm trying, Dr. Reeves hammered at her controls. The system isn't responding. Something's gone wrong with the initialization sequence. The center of the ring, which had been empty space, now showed something else. Instead of the far wall of the chamber, Marcus could see what looked like an alien landscape. Purple sky stretched above rocky terrain under two small suns. Strange vegetation grew in twisted shapes he'd never seen before. And in the distance, structures that definitely weren't built by human hands rose from the foreign ground. My God, Marcus whispered. It's real. It's actually real. The pulling force became irresistible. Marcus felt his feet leave the ground as he was drawn toward the ring. Dr. Reeves was shouting something about emergency shutdown procedures, but her voice faded as the humming reached a crescendo. The last thing he heard was the sound of alarms beginning to blare throughout the facility. Marcus passed through the ring. The transition was instantaneous and disorienting. One moment, he was flying through the air in the familiar chamber at Area 51. And the next, he was tumbling across rocky ground under an alien sky. The humming stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence broken only by the sound of his own breathing. He lay still for several minutes, afraid to move. His body ached from the rough landing, but nothing seemed broken. Slowly, he sat up and looked around. He was definitely not in Nevada anymore. The landscape stretched out in all directions, a mixture of rocky outcroppings and strange vegetation. The plants looked almost familiar at first glance, like twisted versions of earth trees and bushes, but they moved wrong in the gentle breeze. Some of them seemed to track his movement, turning toward him as he shifted position. The sky was the most unsettling part. Instead of blue, it was a deep purple color that shifted to pink near the horizons. Two suns hung overhead, one larger and more yellow than Earth's sun, the other smaller and reddish. The light they cast made everything look slightly wrong, as if he was viewing the world through colored filters. Marcus stood up carefully and checked his pockets. His phone was dead, showing no signal and refusing to turn on. His toolkit had scattered when he landed, and he spent several minutes gathering up his tools. At least he had something familiar with him in this strange place. In the distance, he could see the structures he'd glimpsed through the ring. They were closer than they had appeared from the other side, maybe a mile away. They looked like buildings, but their architecture was unlike anything from Earth. Tall spires twisted up into the sky, connected by bridges that seemed too delicate to support any weight. The entire complex had an organic quality, as if it had been grown rather than built. Marcus realized he had a choice to make. He could stay where he was and hope that Dr. Reeves and her team could reopen the gateway from the other side, or he could head toward the alien structures and try to find answers. or at least shelter. The decision was made for him when he heard a sound in the distance. It started as a low whistle but quickly grew into a howl that raised the hair on his arms. Whatever was making that noise was big, and it was moving in his direction. Marcus grabbed his toolkit and started walking toward the structures. The ground was rougher than it looked, covered in loose rocks that shifted under his feet. The strange plants rustled as he passed, and he had the unsettling feeling that they were watching him. As he got closer to the buildings, Marcus could see more details. The structures were enormous, much larger than they had appeared from a distance. The tallest spire rose at least 1,000 feet into the purple sky. The surfaces weren't smooth like human construction but textured, with patterns that reminded him of tree bark or coral. There were no visible doors or windows in the lower sections of the buildings. Instead, openings appeared to be scattered randomly across the surfaces at various heights, connected by those impossible bridges. Some of the openings glowed with soft light, suggesting that whatever lived here was currently in residence. The howling sound came again, closer this time. Marcus picked up his pace. He reached the base of the nearest structure just as something emerged from the rocky terrain behind him. Marcus ducked behind a formation that might have been decorative stonework or might have been part of the building itself. From his hiding spot, he watched the creature that had been hunting him. It was like nothing he'd ever imagined. The creature stood about 8 feet tall on 6 legs that ended in broad, padded feet. Its body was covered in what looked like metallic scales that shifted color to match its surroundings. 2 long necks extended from its shoulders, each ending in a head with multiple eyes and a mouth full of sharp teeth. The creature paused at the spot where Marcus had landed and sniffed the air with both heads. It was clearly following his scent trail. Marcus held his breath and tried to stay perfectly still. After what felt like hours but was probably only a few minutes, the creature moved on, heading in the wrong direction. Marcus waited until he was sure it was gone before emerging from his hiding spot. He needed to find a way into the building. As he walked around the base, looking for some kind of entrance, he noticed that the textured surface wasn't just decorative. Up close, he could see that the patterns formed a complex design, almost like a circuit board. Some sections pulsed with faint light, as if power was flowing through them. Marcus was an IT specialist, used to troubleshooting complex systems. This looked like technology. Just technology based on completely different principles than anything from Earth. He pulled out his tablet, which thankfully still worked, and started taking pictures of the patterns. Maybe he could figure out how it worked. As he photographed one particularly complex section, the patterns suddenly brightened. A section of the wall began to shift, flowing like liquid metal, until an opening appeared. Marcus stared in amazement. He'd somehow activated a door. Inside the opening, he could see a corridor that curved upward into the structure. Soft light emanated from the walls themselves, providing enough illumination to see by. The air coming from inside was warm and carried strange scents, like ozone mixed with growing plants. Marcus hesitated at the threshold. Once he went inside, there was no telling what he might encounter. But the creature was still out there somewhere, and he had no other shelter. Besides, his curiosity was stronger than his fear. He'd always wondered what was really going on at Area 51. Now he had a chance to discover something far more extraordinary than anything he'd imagined. Marcus stepped through the doorway and into the alien structure. The corridor was unlike any hallway he'd ever seen. Instead of straight lines and right angles, everything curved in smooth, flowing shapes. The walls, floor, and ceiling blended together seamlessly, creating a tunnel that felt more like the inside of a living organism than a building. The surfaces had the same textured pattern he'd seen outside, and they pulsed with gentle light that seemed to respond to his presence. As Marcus walked deeper into the structure, the corridor branched and curved in ways that defied his sense of direction. He quickly became lost, but the path seemed to be leading him upward toward the center of the building. Along the way, he passed openings that led to other areas, but he didn't dare explore them. He had no idea who or what lived here, and he didn't want to stumble into their private spaces without warning. The silence was unsettling. Marcus had expected to hear voices or machinery or something that would indicate the presence of intelligent life. Instead, there was only the soft sound of his own footsteps and a subtle humming that might have been the building's equivalent of electrical systems. Finally, The corridor opened into a vast chamber at the center of the structure. Marcus stepped out onto what appeared to be a balcony, overlooking an enormous space filled with incredible sights. The chamber was hundreds of feet across and stretched up toward the top of the spire. At its center was a structure that reminded Marcus of a tree, but made of the same flowing metallic material as everything else. Branches extended out at various levels, supporting platforms where he could see figures moving around. The figures were clearly not human. They were tall and slender, with elongated limbs and heads that were larger in proportion than human heads. Their skin, if that's what it was, had a translucent quality and seemed to glow faintly from within. They moved with fluid grace, as if gravity affected them differently. Marcus counted at least 20 of the beings visible from his vantage point. They seemed to be engaged in various activities around the tree structure, working with devices and displays that he couldn't identify. Their movements were purposeful and coordinated, suggesting a complex society with specialized roles. One of the beings looked up and saw him. Marcus froze as the creature pointed in his direction and made sounds that were definitely communication but unlike any language he'd ever heard. The sounds were musical, with tones that seemed to harmonize with each other. Other beings stopped what they were doing and turned to look at him. Marcus raised his hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peaceful intent. He had no idea if these beings were friendly or hostile, but they didn't seem immediately aggressive. They appeared more curious than threatened by his presence. One of the beings began moving toward his balcony, gliding up through the air without any visible means of support. As it approached, Marcus could see more details. The being's face had features that were almost human but stretched and elongated. Its eyes were larger and darker than human eyes, and its mouth was smaller. It wore no clothing, but its translucent skin showed patterns of light flowing beneath the surface. The being stopped a few feet away from Marcus and made more musical sounds. When Marcus didn't respond, it tilted its head and studied him with obvious intelligence. After a moment, it reached toward a device on its wrist and touched something. Suddenly, Marcus could understand what it was saying. "What are you?" the being asked, its voice somehow appearing directly in Marcus's mind rather than through his ears. "You are not of this realm. But you are not of the Void Hunters either. How did you come to be here?" Marcus swallowed hard and tried to speak. "I'm human. I'm from Earth. I came through some kind of gateway by accident." The being's eyes widened. "Human. Earth. These words are not known to us. You claim to be from beyond the known realms?" "I guess so," Marcus said. "My people built a machine that opened a portal. I got pulled through it and ended up here. I don't even know where here is." The being floated closer, studying Marcus with obvious fascination. "This is remarkable. I am Zarathul, first speaker of the Luminari. You have come to the third realm, though we know it simply as the realm. Your arrival explains the disturbances our sensors detected. A new pathway has opened." Marcus felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. At least these beings seemed intelligent and potentially friendly. But he was clearly very far from home, and he had no idea how to get back. "I need to get home," Marcus said. "My people don't know what happened to me. Is there a way to reopen the portal?" Zarathul's expression grew troubled. "The pathways between realms are not easily created or controlled. Those who attempt such things often attract the attention of the Void Hunters. If your people have opened a permanent gateway, they may have endangered themselves and all the connected realms." "Void Hunters?" Marcus asked. "Creatures from beyond the known realms that consume all life and energy. They sense the opening of pathways and use them to spread their destruction. If they have detected your gateway, they will come." Marcus felt his heart sink. Not only was he stranded in an alien world, but his arrival might have put both his home and this realm in danger. The weight of the situation settled on his shoulders as he realized that his ordinary life as an IT technician at Area 51 had suddenly become something far more significant and terrifying than anything he could have imagined. Marcus spent the next several hours in what the Luminari called the Council Chamber, explaining his situation to a gathering of their leaders. The beings were fascinated by his description of Earth and human civilization, but their concern about the Void Hunters overshadowed their curiosity. Zarathul translated for the other council members, though Marcus noticed that several of them seemed to understand him directly. Their communication devices apparently had universal translation capabilities that put human technology to shame. "The situation is worse than we initially thought," announced Kethvar, the second speaker, whose skin patterns pulsed with deep red and orange lights when he was agitated. "Our deep sensors have detected movement in the void spaces between realms. The hunters have indeed noticed the new pathway." Marcus watched as the council members exchanged worried glances. Their skin patterns shifted to darker colors, creating a light display that he was beginning to recognize as their equivalent of body language. "How long do we have?" asked Velara, the third speaker, whose patterns remained a steady blue that Marcus had learned indicated calm, analytical thinking. "Days, perhaps weeks," Kethvar replied. "The Void Hunters move slowly between realms, but once they arrive, destruction follows swiftly. We must warn the other settlements and begin evacuation procedures." "Wait," Marcus interrupted. "You're talking about running away. What about fighting them? What about protecting your homes?" "Oh." The council members turned to look at him with expressions that mixed surprise with something that might have been pity. "Human Marcus," Zarathul said gently, "you do not understand what we face. The Void Hunters are not merely dangerous creatures. They are entropy given form. Chaos that devours order and life. No realm has ever successfully defended against them. The only option is to flee to deeper realms and hope they do not follow." Marcus frowned. His practical mind was already working on the problem, approaching it like a complex network issue that needed troubleshooting. "But they have to have some kind of weakness, right? I mean, they're not gods. They're just very advanced predators." Velara's patterns brightened with what Marcus was learning to recognize as curiosity. "Advanced predators. An interesting way to describe them. Tell us more about your thinking." "Well, back home, we have predators too. Some of them are very dangerous, like sharks or bears. But humans learned how to deal with them. We studied their behavior, figured out their weaknesses, and developed strategies to protect ourselves. We didn't just run away." Kethvar's patterns flashed with agitation. "The Void Hunters cannot be compared to simple beasts. They exist partially outside normal space and time. Our weapons pass through them without effect. They corrupt our technology and turn it against us. They are forces of pure destruction." "Okay. But they still have to follow some kind of rules," Marcus insisted. "They exist, which means they have structure. They move between realms, which means they interact with reality in predictable ways. And if they're so unstoppable, how come you all still exist? How come they haven't consumed everything already?" The question seemed to catch the council off guard. They exchanged glances and whispered among themselves in their musical language. "The human raises an interesting point," Velara said finally. "Perhaps we have been so focused on survival that we have not truly studied our enemy." Zarathul nodded slowly. "The ancient records speak of the hunters as a natural force, like storms or earthquakes. We have treated them as such, seeking only to avoid their path. But Marcus suggests a different approach. Because I'm used to fixing things instead of running away from them," Marcus said. "When a computer virus attacks our networks, we don't abandon all our computers. We study the virus, figure out how it works, and create defenses against it." Over the following days, Marcus was given access to the Luminaries' historical records and scientific data about the Void Hunters. What he found was fascinating and frustrating in equal measure. The Luminari had incredibly advanced technology and comprehensive records going back thousands of years, but they had never approached the Void Hunter problem with a systematic scientific methodology. Their records described the hunters as shadow-like entities that appeared without warning, consumed everything in their path, and vanished back into the spaces between realms. They corrupted or destroyed any technology they encountered and seemed immune to all conventional weapons. Most disturbing of all, they appeared to learn from each encounter, becoming more effective at destroying whatever defenses they faced. But Marcus noticed patterns that the Luminari had missed. The hunters didn't attack randomly. They followed specific routes between realms, always entering through the largest stable portals. and moving toward areas of high energy concentration. They seemed drawn to advanced civilizations and avoided empty or primitive regions. They're not just mindless destroyers, Marcus explained to Velara during one of their research sessions. They're selective. They target specific things, which means they have intelligence and purpose. Velara's patterns shifted to show interest. Continue. Look at these attack patterns. Marcus pointed to a display showing hunter movements across multiple realms. They don't just consume everything they encounter. They prioritize certain targets, power sources, communication networks, transportation hubs. They're not trying to kill everything. They're trying to cripple civilizations. To what end? I don't know yet. But purposeful behavior means we can predict it. And if we can predict it, we can prepare for it. Marcus spent hours studying the technical specifications of Luminari technology, comparing it to his knowledge of human engineering principles. The Luminari used what they called harmonics, manipulation of energy frequencies to create their tools and weapons. Their entire civilization was based on achieving perfect harmonic balance with their environment. That's your problem right there, Marcus said during a meeting with the council. You've optimized your technology for harmony and balance, but the Void Hunters are chaos. You're trying to fight a hurricane with a tuning fork. Explain, Zarathul requested. Your weapons are designed to work in harmony with natural forces, but chaos doesn't respond to harmony. You need dissonance, randomness, unpredictability. You need to fight chaos with chaos. The idea was so foreign to Luminari, thinking that it took several hours of discussion before they could even grasp what Marcus was suggesting. Their entire philosophy was based on achieving balance and avoiding discord. The concept of deliberately creating disharmony was almost incomprehensible to them. But Marcus had an advantage that the Luminari lacked: human experience with conflict and violence. Humans had spent thousands of years learning how to destroy things efficiently, and that knowledge was proving unexpectedly useful. Can you show us? Velara asked finally. Marcus grinned. For the first time since arriving in this realm, he felt like he was in his element. I'll need some equipment and a workspace, and I'll need you to trust me, even when what I'm doing seems crazy. The Luminari provided Marcus with a laboratory space in one of the lower levels of their city. It was equipped with advanced fabrication devices that could create almost anything he could describe. The challenge was translating his ideas into terms that their technology could implement. Marcus started with something simple: a basic radio transmitter that used random frequency jumping instead of the stable harmonics that Luminari technology preferred. It took him 3 days to build a prototype, working with Velara to understand the principles behind their fabrication technology. When he activated the device, every Luminari in the immediate area winced and moved away. The random frequencies created a discordant noise that was apparently painful to their sensitive hearing. It is disturbing, Zarathul admitted when she came to inspect Marcus's work. The patterns have no order, no purpose. Exactly, Marcus said proudly. It's pure chaos. And if I'm right about the Void Hunters, they won't know how to handle it. The real test came sooner than anyone expected. Kethvar burst into the laboratory, with his skin patterns flashing urgent orange and red. The hunters have arrived, he announced. Our outer sensors detected their emergence from the void. They will reach our settlement within hours. Marcus felt his stomach drop. His chaos transmitter was still just a prototype, barely functional and completely untested against actual void hunters. But it was the only weapon they had that might work. How many? He asked. 3 entities, Kethvar replied. A small scouting force, but more than enough to destroy our settlement. Kethvar, our settlement. Marcus looked around the laboratory at the various prototypes and half-finished projects he'd been working on. None of them were ready for combat. But perhaps he didn't need perfect weapons. Perhaps he just needed to be unpredictable enough to confuse the hunters. Velara, how fast can your fabrication systems work? Very quickly, if we have clear specifications. Why? Marcus was already moving, grabbing components and sketching designs on his tablet. Because we're going to build the most chaotic, randomly functioning defense system this realm has ever seen, and we're going to do it in the next 4 hours. What followed was the most intense collaborative effort Marcus had ever experienced. He worked with a team of Luminari engineers to rapidly prototype a series of devices based on human military concepts, but implemented with Luminari technology. The result was a collection of weapons that would have given any Earth engineer nightmares. Systems that deliberately malfunctioned in random ways. Defensive shields that fluctuated unpredictably, and sensor arrays that provided intentionally corrupted data. To the Luminari, it was like building a symphony orchestra designed to play out of tune. But Marcus knew from his experience with computer networks that sometimes the best defense against sophisticated attacks was to be too broken and unpredictable for the attacker to understand. As the Void Hunters approached the settlement, Marcus positioned his chaotic defense systems around the perimeter. The Luminari had evacuated all non-essential personnel to deeper underground chambers, leaving only a skeleton crew to operate the defenses. Marcus watched through the settlement's sensors as the hunters emerged from a dark portal about a mile away. They looked exactly as the historical records had described, shifting shadows that seemed to exist only partially in normal space, moving with predatory purpose toward the city. But as they approached the perimeter, something unexpected happened. The lead hunter paused, then moved in a different direction. Then it paused again. As if confused, the other two hunters seemed equally uncertain, circling the settlement instead of attacking directly. "They don't know what to make of your chaos machines," Velara observed, her patterns bright with excitement. "Their behavior is completely different from previous encounters." Marcus watched as the hunters attempted to probe his defenses. Each time they approached a chaos device, the random emissions seemed to confuse them. They would retreat, circle around, and try a different approach, only to encounter another unpredictable system. "It's working," Marcus breathed. "They're programmed to understand and counter organized defenses. But they can't figure out how to fight something that doesn't make sense." The standoff continued for several hours. The hunters seemed reluctant to enter the settlement while the chaos devices were active, but they also showed no signs of leaving. Marcus realized that he had created a temporary solution, not a permanent one. Eventually, the hunters would either figure out how to deal with the chaos or simply wait for the devices to run out of power. "We need to take the offensive," Marcus told the council. "Confusing them isn't enough. We need to drive them away." "How?" Zarathul asked. "Our weapons are still ineffective against them." Marcus smiled grimly. "We're not going to attack them with weapons. We're going to attack them with pure, weaponized chaos." Working through the night, Marcus and his team modified the settlement's main power core to produce massive bursts of random energy. It was incredibly dangerous. A malfunction could destroy the entire city. But Marcus had noticed something in the hunter behavior patterns that gave him hope. "They're not just immune to organized attacks," he explained to Velara as they calibrated the system. "They actually need organization to function properly. They're parasites that feed on ordered energy systems, but if we hit them with enough chaos, we might disrupt their ability to maintain coherence." The plan was simple in concept but terrifying in execution. Marcus would use the modified power core to create a massive pulse of chaotic energy that would flood the area around the settlement. If his theory was correct, it would disrupt the hunters' ability to maintain their form in this realm. If he was wrong, it would probably kill everyone in the settlement. "Are you certain this will work?" Kethvar asked as they prepared for the attempt. Marcus looked out at the circling hunters, then back at the worried faces of the Luminari leaders. "No," he admitted. "But I'm certain that running away won't solve the problem. Eventually, you run out of places to run to." The moment came at dawn, when the settlement's power core reached optimal charging levels. Marcus stood at the control panel, his finger hovering over the activation switch. Around him, the surviving Luminari waited in tense silence. "Whatever happens," Marcus said, "remember that this was a choice. We chose to fight instead of fleeing. That means something." He pressed the switch. The pulse of chaotic energy erupted from the settlement like a wave of pure discord, washing over the surrounding landscape in all directions. The effect on the Void Hunters was immediate and dramatic. Their shadowy forms began to flicker and distort, as if they were struggling to maintain their coherence. One of the hunters let out a sound that Marcus felt more than heard. a discordant wail that seemed to come from somewhere beyond normal space. Then it simply vanished, its form dissolving back into the void between realms. The other two hunters lasted longer, but they were clearly in distress. Their movements became erratic and uncontrolled. Finally, they too retreated into portal rifts that snapped shut behind them. For several minutes, nobody moved or spoke. Then Velara's patterns began to glow with brilliant white light. The luminary expression of joy and amazement. "They are gone," she whispered. "The void hunters have been driven away." Marcus slumped against the control panel, exhausted but relieved. Around him, the luminari began to celebrate, their skin patterns creating a light show of triumph and gratitude. But even as he shared in their joy, Marcus knew that this was just the beginning. He had proven that the void hunters could be fought, but he had also revealed the existence of effective weapons against them. Other hunter forces would come, and they would be prepared for chaos-based defenses. The war for the realms had only just begun, and somehow, an ordinary IT technician from Area 51 had become humanity's unexpected representative in a conflict that would determine the fate of multiple civilizations. 3 weeks after the first successful defense against the void hunters, Marcus found himself in a situation he never could have imagined. He stood before representatives from 7 different realms, all gathered in the grand assembly hall that the Luminari had constructed specifically for this unprecedented meeting. The beings before him represented civilizations that spanned countless light years and dimensions. There were the crystalline Shardani, whose bodies were made of living diamond and who communicated through harmonic resonance. The gaseous Ethelmori flowed in, contained energy fields, their thoughts visible as swirling patterns of color. The mechanical construct Var had achieved consciousness through pure logic, their robotic forms clicking and humming with computational processes. All of them had one thing in common. They were losing the war against the Void Hunters. "The attacks have intensified across all known realms," reported Nexus Prime, the leader of the construct Var. Its voice emerged from speakers built into its cylindrical body. "The Hunters have changed their tactics since the incident at the Luminari settlement. They now arrive in larger forces and appear to be adapting to defensive strategies." Marcus nodded grimly. His success against the first Hunter Scout team had apparently attracted attention from whatever intelligence controlled their operations. Reports were coming in daily of increased Hunter activity across multiple realms, with attacks that showed disturbing levels of coordination and learning. "They're probing for weaknesses," Marcus explained to the assembly. "Every time they encounter new defenses, they analyze them and develop countermeasures. It's exactly what I would do if I were trying to hack into a network." Zarathul translated his words for those beings whose communication devices couldn't handle human concepts directly. Marcus had learned that humans had a unique way of thinking about problems that often didn't translate well to other species. "The human suggests that the hunters possess strategic intelligence," announced Crystal Singer Death Ara, the Shard Ani representative. Her voice created musical notes that somehow conveyed meaning directly to Marcus's mind. "This contradicts our understanding of them as forces of nature." "That's exactly the problem," Marcus said, standing up to address the assembly directly. "You've been treating them like natural disasters instead of intelligent opponents. But they're not hurricanes or earthquakes. They're more like computer viruses with strategic thinking capabilities." He activated a holographic display that showed hunter movement patterns across multiple realms over the past month. The data had been compiled from reports provided by all the attending civilizations. "Look at this pattern." Marcus pointed to specific attack routes highlighted in red. "They're not just randomly destroying things. They're systematically targeting communication networks, power grids, and transportation hubs. They want to isolate each civilization and prevent us from coordinating our defenses." The assembly fell silent as the implications sank in. Velara's patterns shifted to worried blue as she spoke. "You believe they fear cooperation between our peoples?" "I think they're trying to prevent exactly what we're doing right now," Marcus replied. "Think about it. In all your historical records, has there ever been a multi-realm alliance formed specifically to fight the Hunters?" The representatives exchanged glances and whispered among themselves in their various forms of communication. Finally, Flow Director Thyses Mole of the Ethel Mori responded, its gaseous form pulsing with dark colors. No such alliance has ever been attempted, it admitted. Each realm has always faced the hunters alone, and each realm has always failed to stop them permanently, Marcus pointed out. But what if that's exactly what the hunters were trying to ensure? What if they've been using divide and conquer tactics all along? Over the next several days, Marcus worked with representatives from each civilization to develop a comprehensive understanding of hunter capabilities and behaviors. What emerged was a picture far more complex and disturbing than anyone had suspected. The Void Hunters weren't just predators or forces of entropy. They were the military arm of something larger and more organized. Analysis of their attack patterns revealed a level of strategic planning that suggested central coordination across vast distances and multiple dimensional barriers. They're like an immune system, Marcus explained to a gathering of the Alliance's top scientific minds. But instead of protecting a body, they're protecting the void spaces between realms. Every time our civilizations advance too far, develop too much technology, or start communicating across realms, the hunters appear to knock us back down. Dr. Construct Eth, the Construct VAR's chief researcher, processed this information through its logic cores. This hypothesis suggests that advancement itself triggers hunter responses. But what intelligence benefits from keeping other civilizations primitive? These RBA. These RBA. These. Marcus had been thinking about that question for days. The answer, when it came to him, was both simple and terrifying. Something that feeds on the energy produced by struggling civilizations, he said slowly. Something that wants us to remain advanced enough to generate useful energy, but not so advanced that we can threaten it directly. The concept was so alien to most of the Alliance species that it took significant explanation. These civilizations had evolved along paths of cooperation and harmony. The idea of deliberately maintaining other species at a specific level of development for exploitation purposes was almost incomprehensible to them. But Marcus came from a species that understood exploitation and systematic oppression. Humans had spent millennia perfecting various forms of organized cruelty, and that dark knowledge was proving invaluable in understanding their enemy. "So how do we fight back?" asked Zarathul during one of their strategy sessions. Marcus smiled grimly. "We do exactly what they don't want us to do. We advance. We coordinate. And we make ourselves too dangerous for them to control." The plan that emerged from weeks of collaboration was ambitious beyond anything any single realm had ever attempted. Instead of defensive strategies, they would take the war to the hunters' home territory, the void spaces between realms. Each civilization contributed its unique capabilities to the effort. The Luminari provided their harmonic manipulation technology. The Shardani offered their crystalline energy storage systems. The Ethelmori contributed their mastery of dimensional navigation. The Construct VAR supplied computational power and logical analysis capabilities. But the key innovation came from Marcus himself. A weapon system based on human concepts of asymmetric warfare and guerrilla tactics. "We're not going to meet them in open battle," Marcus explained to the Alliance's military planners. "We're going to make them come to us, and then we're going to make them wish they hadn't." The weapon Marcus designed was unlike anything that existed in any realm. It was based on the same chaos principles that had worked against the first Hunter Scouts, but scaled up and weaponized in ways that only human military thinking could have conceived. The device itself was deceptively simple. A network of interconnected nodes that could be deployed across multiple realms. Each node generated random, chaotic energy patterns that interfered with Hunter abilities to maintain coherence. But the real innovation was in how the nodes worked together. "It's called a mesh network," Marcus explained to Velara as they calibrated the first prototype. "Each node is connected to every other node. But they don't follow any central control system. If the hunters destroy some nodes, the others automatically reconfigure to maintain coverage. And the more nodes they destroy, the more chaotic the remaining network becomes." The beauty of the system was that it turned the hunters' own learning capabilities against them. Every time they adapted to counter one aspect of the network, the mesh would automatically reconfigure to present new challenges. It was like fighting an opponent that became more unpredictable the more you tried to understand it. Testing the system required careful coordination across all 7 realms. Each civilization deployed nodes in their territory and linked them into the growing network. As the mesh expanded, Marcus monitored its effects on local hunter activity. The results exceeded his expectations. Hunter forces that encountered the mesh network became disoriented and confused, unable to maintain their usual predatory coordination. More importantly, the network seemed to interfere with their ability to communicate with whatever intelligence was directing their operations. "We're jamming their command structure," Marcus reported to the Alliance leadership. "They're cut off from central coordination and forced to operate independently. And they're not very good at independent thinking." But the real test came when the Alliance detected a massive hunter force assembling in the void spaces near the Luminari realm. Sensors indicated that hundreds of entities were gathering for what appeared to be a coordinated assault on all Alliance territories simultaneously. "This is it," Marcus told the assembled leaders. "They're making their move, but so are we." The final confrontation took place across 7 dimensions simultaneously. As hunter forces emerged from the void into each realm, they encountered not scattered, disorganized defenses, but a coordinated network of chaotic interference that spanned multiple realities. Marcus coordinated the defense from a command center aboard a joint Alliance vessel positioned in the space between realms. Around him, representatives from each civilization worked together with a level of cooperation that would have been impossible before the hunter threat forced them to unite. "Hunter Force Alpha entering Luminari space," reported Velera from her station. "Confirmed emergence in Shardani territory," added Dethara. "Multiple contacts across all realms," announced Nexus Prime. Marcus watched the tactical displays as hunter forces tried to execute their coordinated assault. But instead of the scattered, confused defenses they expected, they found themselves caught in a web of chaotic interference that stretched across all targeted realms. "Activate the mesh network," Marcus ordered. Across 7 realities, the chaos nodes came online simultaneously. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Hunter forces that had maintained perfect coordination suddenly found themselves unable to communicate or coordinate their attacks. Individual entities became confused and disoriented, their usual predatory efficiency reduced to random, ineffective movements. But Marcus wasn't content with just confusing them. While the hunters struggled to adapt to the chaos network, Alliance forces launched their own offensive operations. Strike teams equipped with chaos-based weapons hit hunter concentrations in coordinated attacks across all 7 realms. The battle lasted for 3 days and nights across multiple dimensions. Marcus coordinated the Alliance response from his command center, orchestrating attacks and defenses with a level of strategic thinking that impressed even the logical. "Construct VAR. The human demonstrates remarkable tactical awareness," observed Dr. Construct Death during a brief lull in the fighting. "Its ability to process multiple simultaneous conflicts exceeds our computational models." What the Construct VAR didn't understand was that Marcus wasn't just processing the battle intellectually. He was feeling it, intuiting connections and patterns in ways that pure logic couldn't match. His human ability to think creatively under pressure was giving the Alliance an edge that their enemies couldn't counter. On the 3rd day, something unprecedented happened. The hunter forces began to retreat, not just falling back to regroup, but actually withdrawing from the realms entirely, disappearing back into the void spaces between realities. "They're running," whispered Zarathul, her patterns bright with disbelief. "No," Marcus corrected, watching the sensor displays carefully. "They're regrouping, but they're also learning. They know now that the realms can coordinate against them. That changes everything." In the aftermath of the battle, the Alliance had achieved something that had never been accomplished before. They had forced the Void Hunters to retreat, but more importantly, they had proven that cooperation between realms was not only possible but devastatingly effective. "The paradigm has shifted," observed Flow Director Thysmol during the post-battle analysis. "The Hunters can no longer count on fighting isolated civilizations." Marcus nodded, but his expression remained serious. "This was just round 1. They'll be back. And next time they'll be prepared for our tactics. We need to keep advancing, keep surprising them." Over the following months, the Alliance evolved from a temporary military partnership into a permanent inter-realm organization. Technologies were shared freely between civilizations. Scientific knowledge flowed across dimensional barriers. Cultural exchanges began to break down the isolation that had kept the realms separate for millennia. Marcus found himself appointed as the first director of strategic innovation, a position that essentially made him the Alliance's chief military strategist. It was a role that would have been unthinkable for an IT technician from Area 51. But Marcus had learned that extraordinary circumstances could transform ordinary people into extraordinary leaders. The war with the Void Hunters continued, but the nature of the conflict had fundamentally changed. Instead of isolated civilizations falling one by one to an unstoppable force, the universe now had a coordinated defense network that grew stronger with each passing day. Marcus stood in his office aboard the Alliance headquarters, looking out at a view that showed 7 different dimensional spaces simultaneously. Representatives from dozens of civilizations worked together in the stations below, sharing knowledge and resources that were rapidly advancing the technological capabilities of all Alliance members. A communication came through from Dr. Reeves back at Area 51. The gateway had been stabilized, and they were eager for Marcus to return and share what he had learned. But Marcus found himself reluctant to leave. He had discovered something in this strange realm that he had never found on Earth, a sense of purpose that went beyond himself. "I'll be back," he transmitted to Dr. Reeves. "But not yet. There's still work to do here." As he watched Alliance scientists work on new technologies that combined human creativity with alien innovation, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He had started as an ordinary man with an ordinary job, fixing computers in a basement, but circumstances had revealed capabilities within himself that he had never known existed. The Void Hunters still posed a threat, lurking in the spaces between realities. But they no longer held the advantage of facing isolated, unprepared civilizations. The universe had learned to fight back, and at the center of that resistance was a human who had proven that sometimes the most ordinary person could become extraordinary when the situation demanded it. Marcus smiled as he returned to his work, developing new strategies to protect the realms. He had found his true calling in the most unlikely place imaginable, and he was determined to ensure that the Alliance would be ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The war was far from over. But for the first time in the history of the known realms, the defenders had hope. And sometimes, hope was the most powerful weapon of all.